Let's bring in Dr. Kevin Roberts. He's the president of the Heritage Foundation and the host of the Kevin Roberts Show. Sir, good to have you back with us.
Vince, it's always great to be with you. Thanks for everything you do for America.
Thank you, sir. Isn't it amazing, though, that we have Biden out there today saying that he doesn't want to secure the border, he's just forced to by law?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is the theme every time we talk, either on the radio or in person, that we are living through George Orwell's 1984. You know, it's one thing for a radical leftist administration to implement dumb policy. It's an entirely different thing to try to decipher the implementation of that dumb policy and then call it something else. I mean,
yes.
but let's keep in mind, as you often talk about, your audience knows, the whole point that their whole approach is to disorient us so we don't know what to believe. And ultimately, to wrap up on this response, they're doing this because they know that this is a dramatic political loser for them, not just for the presidency, but for almost every level of election next year.
Yeah. And on that point, if I can dwell on it for just a moment, and then we'll talk about the speaker's race. You know, I really do think that, and I was saying it earlier in the program, that the reason they're allowing this much chaos to take place is because it atomizes us. It actually breaks up our society. It breaks up the bonds that hold us together. It makes it so that it's harder to organize against the government, and it requires the government to consume more power to be the savior from all of the chaos they've created. I really think that that's the case.
Yeah, man, just keep injecting that de Tocqueville rhetoric into my veins. That is so important for us to remember. So many things I could say, but I'll limit myself to this one point. And it is the radical left has turned politics into our civil religion. And while it's very important that we follow politics and that we're involved in it, we try to affect the outcome of it, the most important thing we can do to minimize the effect of politics on our daily lives is to revitalize our communities, our institutions of civil society. We have to relegate it to the back seat. Otherwise, this nonsense, this Orwellian nonsense from Mayorkas and Biden actually doesn't just affect us in policy. It affects us hour by hour in our daily lives.
Yes, and it creates a lot of distrust in our communities, which creates more of that chaos. Let's jump into the speaker's race now. Obviously, this is a historic week. You know, Kevin McCarthy has been thrown out as Speaker of the House. A number of men have thrown their hat into the ring, including Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, Kevin Hern. What do you make of this speaker race? What should we be looking for as we consider who should be the next Speaker of the House? And more importantly, of course, what should members of Congress be looking for since they vote?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And no disrespect to those gentlemen who've thrown their hat in the ring or those who might, you know, over the next few days. They know that. They would even say this, I hope, that the most important thing is not the personality. It's not the person who will be the next speaker. It's the commitments that person will make to good policy. And so what Heritage is saying is, and these are the conversations I'm having with these guys, you know, actually even just in the last hour, you got to commit to making sure that when we pass the next short-term spending bill, that it has the language of House Resolution 2, the Great Border Security Bill. First and foremost, McCarthy had that deal for reasons you've covered. It fell apart. Heritage was a big proponent of that. What happened to McCarthy just a few days ago is now history. We really have to be zealously focused on that, both for economic reasons, but also for security reasons. But this is also important, and I give a hat tip to two of the three candidates thus far, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Hern, for saying Ukraine funding is not nearly as important as those two things. And we have to get those two things done first.
Yeah.
That is economic stability and the lawlessness at the border before we even have a conversation about Ukraine. The more we sing from that hymnal, the better off this next speaker, whoever he or she will be, will be.
I noticed that this is going to be one of the clear delineating lines, at least for Steve Scalise, because there's a lot of sympathy, as you would expect, empathy and appreciation for Steve Scalise. He survived an attempted massacre by a Democrat gunman, and thank God he's still with us. And he goes back to work in the United States Congress. Now he wants to run for Speaker of the House. But this issue, Ukraine, really is a dividing line between him and the other two men you just mentioned, Jim Jordan and Kevin Hern, because when these funding bills have come before Congress over the past year, Scalise has been on the side of voting to send much more money to Ukraine. Jim Jordan and Kevin Hern, they've been on the other side. They want more accountability and more focus on domestic issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I love Steve Scalise. He knows that. I've been a fan of his since he was in the Louisiana legislature, and a great man, a great patriot, and thank God he's still with us. And I'm grateful for his leadership. Having said that, if you know what time it is in America today, you know it is that even if you support more limited funding or additional funding for Ukraine, that where the conservative base is, I mean, almost everyone is at this spot, is that we must have a standalone bill, a standalone conversation about it. We are winning that argument. It has nothing to do with wanting anything other than the Ukrainians to be victorious, but it's about regular order, and more importantly, it's about putting Americans first. Scalise is going to have to reckon with that. That's the advice that I would give him purely from a policy and ideas standpoint. And I do think that Mr. Jordan and Mr. Hearn are in the right spot as it relates to where the conservative movement is.
Also, what is the end goal in Ukraine? That's an important question here. I want to play some audio. This is Jim Jordan this morning on Fox raising this, what appears to be a very complicated question. And it troubles me that a member of Congress doesn't have the answer yet.
Why should we be sending American tax dollars to Ukraine when we don't even know what the goal is? No one can tell me what the objective is. Is it some kind of negotiated peace? Is it driving them out of the eastern Ukraine? Is it driving them out of Crimea, which they've had for 10 years now, or they took during the Obama administration? What is the objective? And so until you can tell me the goal, I don't think we should continue to send money there, particularly when we have the problems we have on our border.
How is it possible that somebody who's now a candidate for Speaker of the House doesn't actually have the answer to that important question?
Well, it says everything about the foreign policy blob that for so many years and decades has run this country. And as you know, Vince, 18 months ago, Heritage was the first major organization on the political right to stand up and say, stop. That has nothing to do with anything other than our desire for Ukraine to win. But more importantly than that, it's that the American people, especially at this time of us being on the brink of civilizational decline, we require transparency. And this member, this is, you're not blaming Jim Jordan, I know that, nor am I. It says everything about how we have to obfuscate. The blob has got to obfuscate what reality is. And even those of us who merely ask the question, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's Jim Jordan, Kevin Hearn, whomever, if we merely ask the question,
yes, what
is the end game? Somehow we're vilified as being pro-Russia. It tells you we're over the target in terms of policy. And ultimately, this is the irony and really the tragedy. The more time the blob spends vilifying those of us who are asking fair, reasonable, just questions on the vilification of us, the less time we have to have the actual policy conversation about what we need to be doing.
On Jim Jordan for a moment, I don't want to dwell on these guys each if I can. On Jim Jordan, I like a lot of what Jim Jordan has to say. I think he's a great fighter for a whole bunch of things, including against the tyranny that we're seeing at the hands of our government. But I am concerned because the impression that Jim Jordan has left a lot of people with is that he's a little cozy with big tech in a way that we don't want a conservative fighter to be. And I'm looking for him to address that, I think, with some aggression, hopefully. I know, for instance, in the past, when Tim Cook came to Capitol Hill, he met with Jim Jordan, and I remember we had him here on the program, didn't we, Corey? And I asked him about it a bunch of times. What happened? Did you hold his feet to the fire? And I got a lot of political answers out of the guy. I'm concerned about that because, man, big tech has been a real source of tyranny in our country right now. Dr. Kevin Roberts, are you concerned about this?
I am. Jim Jordan is a friend. Talked to him today. He's excellent on most things. It's a matter of public record that Jim Jordan and the Heritage Foundation don't agree on what to do on big tech. In other words, I would say that he's wrong on it. And I do think that if he wants to reflect where the conservative movement is, he's a sharp, virtuous guy, that he's going to have to address that. He's going to have to give us some commitment on that policy front. So I do think that's a policy weakness of his. And yet I also know Jim to be a thoughtful guy and someone open to suggestions. So this is the point. In the next few days, each of these guys is going to have to figure out what they need to say about those things. But to your point, it can't just be rhetoric. It needs to be real substance, real timelines.
Yep.
I mean, frankly, guarantees about what the policy outcomes will be.
Well, this comes down to what you said a moment ago. Somebody who recognizes what time this is. It's our country's in desperate need of rescue, and there's a lot of forces who are looking to tear us down. We need somebody to help stop that. So then Kevin Hearn is the other. He's the head of the Republican Study Committee. That's a big coalition of Republicans in the House. Tell us about him. What do you think of Kevin Hearn?
Yeah, there's no doubt that members of your audience know the names Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan more, and there's good reason for that. They're good members. They may not know Congressman Hearn as well, for example, as we do at Heritage and I do personally. He's head of the Republican Study Committee, which is an organization that's a cross-section of the Republican Conference. It's the right of center all the way to the right, ideologically, of the Republican Party in the House. Therefore, he's representing 175 members who really are the cross-section of the conservative movement. And so anyone who's the chair of the Republican Study Committee is in a good position to move up into leadership. Interestingly, as you no doubt know, Vince, both Jordan and Scalise once were chairs of the Republican Study Committee. And so as I've told other media folks, Heritage is always close to the Republican Study Committee because they, like we, represent the conservative movement. On Hearn, he's a businessman. He's from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He is an everyday American. He is someone, as I've gotten to know him really well in the last 2 years, and I really like him, is going to tell you the truth. He's not going to varnish it with a bunch of political rhetoric. He's a McDonald's franchisee. So this is a guy who sees things through the lens of the everyday American. And frankly, I think someone like Hearn would be kind of what the doctor ordered for America right now.
I did see some reporting. I think, was it Philip Wegman maybe reported this, that Heritage may soon make an endorsement in this race? Is that likely, Dr. Roberts?
Our 501c4 Heritage Action, which I now have the privilege of being the president of, legally can make an endorsement. It's not something we currently do because we have done. We like members to act first, but we're contemplating it. We've got some good candidates here. And we're really grateful that in spite of what happened earlier this week, we might be able to have a speaker who advances policy. For us, it's going to be all about policy, not about personality, but we are actively considering it.
Okay. And then finally, should Donald Trump be the next Speaker of the House, do you think?
Absolutely not. That's the worst idea I've heard this year.
Okay. It wasn't my idea. Don't blame me. Although they are saying
against you, but
they are saying he might show up next week for this.
President Trump, for whom we ought to have a lot of gratitude, needs to be focused on other things and put that rumor to rest. I can tell you it's not at all helpful for that dynamic to be injected into the speaker race right now.
Okay. All right. Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time as always.